Hunter is one of the 4/5 starter archetypes in Remnant 2. It's a class all about marking enemies, increasing your team's crit chance, and granting an absurd boost to range damage. The Hunter skills all revolve around applying the marked effect and buffing your guns. Two of them do provide benefits to melee damage, although only one of them really matters in that regard. Marked enemies have their outlines revealed to all players. This effect is visible through walls, which massively helps with overworld and dungeon traversal. Enemies that are marked are also 10% more susceptible to being crit, giving the Hunter and their team a really good leg up in combat. The Hunter's starting skill is Hunter's Mark. Activating it applies the marked effect to all enemies within a scalable 35-meter radius for 25 seconds. The AoE moves with the player, meaning enemies can be marked and unmarked depending on your location. While the skill is active, you also receive a 15% damage boost to both ranged and melee. Once the skill ends, it goes on a lengthy 70-second cooldown. I'm honestly surprised it's that long. Like, I get it's the easiest of the Hunter skills to use, but damn if that isn't quite the wait. The only real tip I can give to help the ability is to run the archetype in your prime slot, although that really applies to all three of the Hunter skills. Their prime perk, as we'll discuss later, helps with all three skills immensely, especially when you have a cooldown as long as Hunter's Mark. You could also level Amplitude to make these skills range a staggering 52 meters, but I find this to be really overkill in a lot of situations. Most bosses are well within 25 meters of the player, let alone 35. Now when it comes to mobbing and traversing through dungeons in the overworld, it's a different story. The extra range in those scenarios can be very helpful, but is by no means required. At level 5, the Hunter unlocks their second skill, Hunter's Focus. This ability grants the player the focused effect if they aim down sights uninterrupted for 0.5 seconds. This 0.5 seconds must not involve any shooting or reloading. Performing either action during it will pause the timer. If the player stops aiming for 0.75 seconds, the effect dissipates. Swapping while aiming down sights does not remove the buff. This lasts for 25 seconds and goes on cooldown for 50. While the player is focused, weapon spread, recoil, and sway are reduced by 50%. They also gain 25% range damage and 25% ranged weak spot damage. Any targets aimed at while focused will be marked. This mark will stay as long as you keep a direct line of sight on said target while aiming. Should you look away, the mark will wear off after 2 seconds. Despite my lengthy description of the ability, it's not really that complicated. You aim down sights, you get a buff. It's definitely the strongest Hunter skill in my eyes, but it definitely has some limiting factors. Maintaining the focused effect can actually take a bit of discipline. In a game like Remnant where you need to evade or reposition frequently, requiring the player to constantly aim down sights can be a huge detriment. It can lead to you getting tunnel vision and dying from an ad or hazard. You might restrict your stamina bar's regen and not have enough to dodge an attack. You might not be able to shoot a target in time as you're waiting for the buff to activate. A dozen different things can go wrong when using this skill, but when it works, you can pump out some really good DPS. There are a few things that can help mitigate some of the frustrations when using the ability, the most impactful of them all being friends. Having summons or player allies to help draw aggro makes the skill way more comfortable to work with. You can also invest in ADS move speed via footwork, sidewinder, ring of the vein, or general move speed bonuses to improve your ability to strafe attacks while aiming. It's also possible to evade and re-aim your weapon within the grace period. With all weight classes bar ultra heavy, you can neutral dodge and ADS in time before the buff expires. With light and medium sets, you can dodge directionally and maintain it so long as you have at least 17% faster evade speed. Light and medium sets have different iframe values, but they actually share the same animation duration. Why specifically 17%? Well, I tested it with 15% and that wasn't enough. Then I tested it with 20% and that worked. So I used the evade speed fragments and haste to hit 17% and it also worked. There's a chance it also works at 16%, but I don't think there's any way to test that outside of modifying the game. If you're curious, heavyweight can also maintain the focus on directional dodge, but only when you hit 50% evade speed. At that point, you might as well just slap on dull steel ring and hit medium weight, or just get used to only neutral dodging. If you plan on running an ultra set, you're pretty much dedicating yourself to a tank/leech build, which can work, however, you'll need to invest in stagger reduction to not get knocked out of focus constantly. Hunter Shroud is unlocked at level 10 and is the most radical of the archetype skills. It turns your typically mid to long range archetype into a close range powerhouse, albeit in brief spurts. Upon activating the ability, the player becomes nearly invisible. Don't mistake this for actual invisibility though. It just gives you minus 25% threat generation. Oddly enough, it also grants 15% heavy carry speed, which makes absolutely zero sense. Attacking, activating a mod or skill will remove the Shroud. When your Shroud is removed, it marks all targets within 10 meters of you for 2 seconds. Unfortunately, this AoE does not scale, unlike Hunter's Mark. For For 2 seconds after removing the Shroud, you gain a 50% bonus to ranged and melee damage. This buff tapers off over said 2 seconds, meaning some weapons won't benefit from the effect nearly as much as others. After not attacking for 1.15 seconds, you'll automatically recloak. This skill lasts 15 seconds and has a massive 90-second cooldown. The nature of this skill may lead you to believe it's only effective in close quarters combat, but it can actually work at any range really. Only the mark is restricted to 10 meters. The damage bonus works at any distance. Oddly enough, the description of the damage bonus is holding back a little bit. Exiting the Shroud doesn't just buff your ranged and melee damage, it buffs almost everything. Skill damage, mod damage, dot damage, damage from trinkets, but not summon damage. Many sources will get the damage buff as soon as they're activated, but some need to have the Shroud removed first. Why does it act this way? I couldn't tell you, but it does allow many other aspects of the player's arsenal to be affected by the buff. Now, for a lot of these, there's not really a practical reason to run them together. Like, you're not going to run Impact Cannon from Engineer and suddenly destroy bosses with the extra damage. The short duration and lack of ranged weak spot damage hold it back in that regard. That being said, it does provide a bit of extra damage alongside your already massively buffed ranged and melee attacks. You can really run any weapon you'd like when using Shroud, but the ones that perform the best are single-shot weapons like Spore Bloom, Widowmaker, Sure Shot, and low-capacity weapons like the Coach Gun and Double Barrel. If you want to use automatic weapons, I'd recommend sticking with Hunter's Mark and Focus. Just like with Focus, I also recommend running Hunter as your prime archetype if you want to use the skill, as the 15-second base duration and 90-second cooldown make not doing so feel incredibly debilitating. Starting off with the Hunter's perks, we have Deadeye. This damage perk increases your ranged and weak spot damage by up to 40% and 15% respectively. At level 6, it also increases your crit chance with firearms by 5%. This is hands down one of the strongest damage perks in the entire game. The fact that it gives both ranged and weak spot damage is kind of insane. The difference in your gun damage with and without this perk is night and day. The weak spot damage bonus isn't even restricted to just firearms, it's a global weak spot damage bonus. This does make a bit of sense considering 2 of the Hunter skills also buff melee damage, although that does raise the question why the crit chance buff doesn't cover melee damage as well, not to imply this archetype needs any help whatsoever. Return to Sender is the Hunter's team perk. Its wording is very off, as seems to be the case with multiple ammo-related effects in this game. It essentially increases your chance of getting an ammo drop on weak spot or crit kill by 50%, and gives said ammo drops a chance to spawn 2-packs. I killed a good few hundred enemies to test this out, and just like with Gunslinger, I accidentally learned something new about the game's mechanics along the way, this time avoiding falling into another rabbit hole. What I realized as I was testing is that ammo drop chance is based on how much ammo you have remaining. The lower the percentage, the more likely you are for an enemy to drop an ammo pack. This means if you're at or close to max ammo, you'll not see many packs drop, which makes sense as you don't need any at that point. If you're really low on ammo, enemies will drop ammo packs relatively often. I assume the first half of the perk simply multiplies your current drop chance by 1.5 times. This would mean that at higher percentages, you wouldn't see any difference in ammo drops, and from my tests, yeah, there's no difference. As for lower percentages, I couldn't really tell if I was getting any more. Like I previously brought up, enemies already drop a good amount of ammo when you're running dry, so it's hard to tell how much of a difference the perk is really making. The perk's latter half does actually help when it procs. Getting 2 ammo packs from an enemy feels pretty nice, especially when you get back-to-back 25% rolls. The game doesn't list what the chance is though, so I can't really call it a reliable effect. Overall, it's certainly a better solo team perk than Posse Up, but it's just barely better than it in terms of being an aid for your team. The Hunter's utility perk is Urgency. It grants you a 15% reload speed buff for 3 seconds after getting a kill. At level 8, the effect lasts 5 seconds and also increases your movement speed by the same percentage. A pretty basic perk, although there is one quirk with the effect I'm not the hugest fan of. If you use a weapon that reloads really quickly, you won't be able to benefit from the full 5 seconds of the buff. This is because the moment you start to reload, the buff's timer goes away and remains until you finish. This is a really nice feature for slower reloading weapons like the Bone Saw. However, it hurts weapons like the Tech 22 and Sure Shot that have very fast reloads. You'll only get 1 hit of the bonus before it's gone. This perk can actually last less than 5 seconds if you reload too fast. This can make the movement speed bonus effectively last as little as 1 second. There's also the issue that stems from it being an on-kill effect. Some boss fights don't have any adds, which means you'll be working with a dead perk slot in some scenarios. For mobbing, however, it's pretty handy, and will definitely save your skin on occasion. Intuition is the Hunter's Relic perk. On relic consumption, it extends your active hunter skills by 5 seconds with diminishing returns on subsequent uses. At level 9, this extension becomes 10 seconds, and every marked enemy you kill with a weak spot increases your relic use speed by 5% up to 50% for 15 seconds. The perk specifies weak spot kills on marked targets, but it seems to proc on basically any marked target kill. As if the perk wasn't already good, this just pushes it even further. The diminishing returns appears to be a 20% flat reduction each time you use a relic, starting at 10, then dropping to 8, 6, 4, 2, and then not giving any more time after 5 relics are consumed. Each marked kill does refresh the timer, meaning you could potentially build up to 10 stacks and then hold it there until you need it, so long as you can keep the kills up. This perk is a fantastic example of working an on-kill effect into a part of the player's arsenal. Even when there's nothing around for you to kill, you still have the extension upside, and when you do net some kills, it supplements the main effect. I wish more on-kill sources were designed like this perk. It's a great benefit when mobbing, and pairs nicely with urgency. Last but certainly not least, we have the Hunter's Prime perk, Dead to Rights. This extends the duration of your hunter skills by dealing ranged and melee weak spot damage. The amount of base weak spot damage needed and time added are dependent on your archetype level. At level 10, dealing 55 base weak spot damage adds 3.5 seconds. Damage dealt is cumulative, making some weapons proc it multiple times a shot depending on their base damage. The time gained per proc diminishes after the first couple hits, decreasing to 2 seconds per proc, then 1, then nothing. It's possible to burn through your extended time if you deal damage too fast, and that's mainly due to how the individual hunter skill duration limits work. Each skill has its own time cap which cannot be surpassed. For Mark, it's 45 seconds, Focus is 30, and Shroud is 25. If you use a high base damage weapon like the Spore Bloom or Widowmaker, you can easily hit the cap and waste a lot of your potential skill uptime by landing too many shots too quickly. This also applies to Intuition's time extension, although it's much more difficult in this case due to your shrinking amount of time gained from the perk. You might think you could circumvent this issue by using skill duration buffing sources like Gifted. Unfortunately, these skill caps are hard-locked. This means increasing your skill duration could actually hurt their overall uptime, as the sooner you hit that cap, the sooner you start burning your extra time. One funny consequence of their hard cap is that in some cases you can actually achieve more than the time cap allows. In those cases, proccing the time extension actually snaps your duration down to the hard cap. This won't ever happen to like 99% of players, but I thought it was kind of amusing. Even with these issues, Dead to Rights is still an incredibly powerful prime perk, and highly recommended if you plan on using Mark and especially Focus. Being able to have your hunter skills up for almost an entire encounter is invaluable. One last thing I'll mention about the perk is that the base weak spot damage required is actually based off of your weapon's unmodified base damage. This means that a weapon with a 100% weak spot damage bonus that does 10 damage base won't proc DTR on its third shot. It'll actually proc it on its 6th shot, with 5 damage carrying over to the next proc. I'm not sure why they don't specify it, but it doesn't really make the perk any less powerful. The Hunter's trait is Long Shot. It increases your ideal max range with guns by 0.6 meters per level, maxing out at 6 meters. This is a nice little boost that many weapons can benefit from. Depending on the location, this can either be really helpful or barely needed. I see it as a spec in it when you need to kind of trait. Many weapons have had their effective range buffed since launch, reducing the need to take this on many weapons. It can be a major help to weapons like the Double Barrel and Spore Bloom though. With all that information out of the way, let's move on to the builds. Hunter's Mark is so basic and effective, it works in literally any setup. There's no single build that synergizes with it more than any other, unless you want to include pre-aiming around corners with snipers. It's one of the best traversal skills in that regard, and in boss fights, it's technically the weakest of the three, but it feels way more comfortable to run over both alternatives. Honestly, depending on your weapons and the boss you're up against, it might be better than Shroud. Due to its lack of actual synergy, I slapped together a random build consisting of Gold Digger, Explorer, Gunfire Security Lanyard, Braided Thorns, Empowering Loop, Destroyer, and Blackout Ring. That last one could have been literally anything else though. I kinda forgot about it several times and accidentally tactically reloaded. My weapons were the Rupture Cannon and Bulldog. Writing this section made me realize how little I think about Hunter's Mark when it comes to build making. It's the Bulletstorm of the Hunter archetype. If you don't want to put much thought into your setup, there's really no downside to running it, outside of the lengthy cooldown. Expertise does drop the cooldown to 56 seconds though, and with a little more investment, it can be fairly manageable. Despite Focus having a shorter cooldown, it's actually the skill I recommend using on Hunter if you run it in your secondary slot. Both Focus and Shroud require time to activate and reactivate their buffs mid-combat. Running Hunter as your prime for Dead to Rights dramatically improves their uptime, and in some cases, they can help you beat a boss in a single cycle, removing the need for any cooldown investment whatsoever. Skill duration bonuses can help a bit in that sense, but they'd be better spent with a skill that doesn't need you to wait a second to recloak or half a second to aim down sights. Out of the three, Hunter's Mark is the least in need of Dead to Rights to function well. Finally, a skill with some direction. To make the most out of Focus's benefits, I went ahead and ran a double shotgun build. Void Cloak Invader was my secondary archetype of choice, with my trinkets consisting of Gunslinger's Charm, Anastasia's Inspiration, Ring of Flawed Beauty, Xania's Malice, and Akari Warband. Top Heavy Spore Bloom and Extender Double Barrel were my weapons of choice. For my fragments, I made sure to grab Evade Speed. It plus Haste are just enough to allow us to directional dodge while maintaining the focus buff. Focus is by far my favorite hunter skill. It gives even more damage to what is already one of the most stacked archetypes in the game. The reduced spread, recoil, and sway make it really satisfying to shoot almost every gun. The ADS requirement isn't really that bad once you learn to just neutral dodge. This skill could have just been a buff to spread, recoil, and sway without the damage boost, and I'd still run it. As it stands, it's a skill that needs a bit of maintenance, but one that is well worth the investment. It works with all types of guns, but the ones that benefit from it the most are undoubtedly shotguns. It's a little insane just how much damage you can crap out with something like the Spore Bloom, although the weapon class's limited range can cause some issues with drop-off. Shroud is an interesting skill to build for, as you aren't necessarily restricted to using it in just close quarters. That being said, I used it in a melee setup, Juggernaut Challenger being my secondary archetype, with Butcher's Fetish, Brawler's Pride, Matriarch's Ring, Drakestone Pearl, and Sealed Resin Loop as my chosen trinkets. Shocker Harvester Scythe was my weapon, Profane Heart my relic, with melee speed, melee crit chance, and crit damage as my fragments. In this build, I forgot to equip one, but I highly recommend using a high base damage weapon like the Widowmaker or Spore Bloom if you want to use Shroud in a melee build. While it is possible to hit some enemy weak spots with melee attacks, it's much easier to use a firearm instead. Besides doing so for increased damage, you'll need to land them if you want to benefit from Dead to Rights. The skill's boost to ranged and melee damage does make it actually one of the best gunfu options in the game though, so it's highly encouraged to lean into that playstyle if you want to use melee with it. Alternatively, you could use a melee like Assassin's Dagger if you want a way to land easier melee weak spots. Godsplitter is also an option if you feel like torturing yourself. The reduced threat generation doesn't really do much in boss fights unless you have a player to take aggro. It can be really helpful in traversal though, allowing summons and companions to take the heat off of you in solo play. I kind of wish the skill made you completely invisible outside of boss fights. Being able to sneak around and weave in and out of stealth to clear dungeons would be really damn cool. It goes without saying that Hunter is by far one of the strongest archetypes in Remnant 2. The sheer damage boost it provides to ranged weapons is unmatched, only amplified by its skill options. It may not have the utility or survivability of Gunslinger or Challenger, but that's why we have 2 archetype slots. Hugs has been dominant since the beginning for a reason, and with no more balance updates planned for Remnant 2, it's not going to change anytime soon. Love it or hate it, the Hunter archetype is a staple of the meta, one that has stood the test of time, through multiple nerfs and several DLC releases. Whether you use it for the massive gun damage buff, or just to feel like a badass sniper assassin, the Hunter always makes their shot count.
Feelings? Look, mate, you know who has a lot of feelings? Blokes who bludgeon their wife to death with a golf trophy. Professionals have standards. Be polite. Be efficient. Have a plan to kill everyone you meet.